which is called guiding light, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as inspiration. And he truly was an inspiration for so many of us. So the first person that we're going to be looking at is Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the very famed, very close companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the second Khalifa of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was Umar who becomes the Khalifa to lead the Muslim Ummah. And so many times in his life, he followed the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He followed him in terms of his leadership. He followed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of his rahmah, in terms of his justice, in terms of his mercy, in terms of his care for others, his care for the ummah, his care for those subjects, whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim. He cared for those people, and all of those people that he cared for, and the way that he cared for them was through the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he got angry for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And when he was happy for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, because he learned all of these things from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Someone who was so close, right? That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, even at one point says that this companion of mine, he is known as Al-Faruq because of what he says, that it was so in line with what Allah Azza wa Jal has ordained, that he was someone who understood not only the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he had this inspiration in him, this divine inspiration that Allah Azza wa Jal gifted him with in order to tell good from evil. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, on many occasions throughout his life, he is inspired by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I want to speak about one in particular. And some of you might have heard this story before, especially those who have attended any of the other classes that I've done, or any other talks that I've done. But this one has to do with when the Muslims opened the great city of Al-Quds, Jerusalem, right? When the Muslims opened Al-Quds, Umar radiallahu anhu, first of all, it should be remembered that the people of Al-Quds surrendered to Umar. And because they surrendered to Umar and they surrendered to the Muslims, Umar radiallahu anhu, he allowed those Christians that were living in Al-Quds to maintain and continue keeping their churches and their places of worship and their property and their personal belongings. Umar radiallahu anhu, because they surrendered peacefully and they agreed to follow the rule of a Muslim ruler, Umar radiallahu anhu allowed them to live in peace. But one thing that he noticed when he enters into the city of Al-Quds, and he meets the people there, the citizens of Al-Quds. Who here knows? Does anyone know one group of people that he does not find in Al-Quds? There was one major group of people that he looked for and he could not find them. This might actually sound surprising. Anyone know? Yeah, go ahead, Osman.
Jews.
Exactly, subhanallah. Imagine that. Al-Quds, right? Jerusalem without Jews. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he walks into the city and he meets these delegations of the Romans and of the Christians that are there. And one group that he noticed that is absent are the Jews. And so he asks, he says, where are the Jews? Where is the Jewish community? Send me their delegation. Tell them to come meet me. And no Jews live in the city of Al-Quds. And the reason for that is because prior to that, for centuries, the Jews had been kicked out by the Romans, by the Christians. They had expelled all of the Jews for centuries, and no Jews lived in Al-Quds. So what does Umar radiallahu anhu do? What does he do? He turns to one of his guides. One of his guides was a Jew, and he turns to that person, and he tells that Jewish man, he says, go and find 200 Jewish families and invite them to come and live in Al-Quds. That he learned, right? This rahmah, this mercy of his, he learned this from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.